The rain was falling heavily that November afternoon, drumming against the old Montero house roof with the steady rhythm of a makeshift instrument played by nature itself. Inside, Helena stood at the window, watching drops gather on the glass, forming tiny rivers that distorted the view of the silent street. There was something about that afternoon that seemed to call for retreat, an almost invisible pull to explore the past, or perhaps to be found by it. The house was over a century old, wearing the marks of time like medals. The creaking floorboards, the slightly slanted walls, the constant scent of aged wood mixed with memories tucked into every corner. The family had lived there for generations, and Helena had always taken pride in belonging to that lineage. She had grown up hearing stories of her great-grandmother Katerina, an imposing matriarch, devoutly religious, a model of moral strength and courage. As a child, Helena imagined her as a character from a historical novel, a woman who faced storms, cared for her children, and guarded the family's honor as her greatest treasure. At 29, Helena was back in the house where she had grown up after a few years living in the capital. The reason was simple and painful. Her mother, Clara, was frail after surgery, and Helena had left her job to care for her. The days dragged by with medical appointments, trips to the pharmacy, and long, silent afternoons when the only sounds were the wind rattling the windows or the distant ringing of church bells at the end of the street. It was on one of those afternoons, while looking for old items to sell at a charity bazaar, that Helena decided to go up to the attic. She hadn't been there in years. She took the iron key from the hallway cabinet, pushed open the narrow door, and was greeted by a rush of cold, dusty air. The attic felt like another world. Shafts of light filtered through the cracks in the roof tiles, illuminating floating dust particles that drifted slowly in the air. The smell was of mildew, laced with the faint sweetness of dried-out wood. Among stacked boxes, old trunks, and furniture that no longer had a place in the house, there was a dark wooden chest in the farthest corner. It was covered with a rough cloth and secured with a rusty padlock. Helena crouched down, pulled off the cloth, and felt a shiver down her spine. She didn't recognize the chest. She couldn't recall ever seeing it before in her life. She searched for something to open the padlock and, after rummaging through a nearby box, found a small, bent key almost hidden among old letters and photographs. To her surprise, it fit perfectly. As she turned it, the metallic click echoed through the attic, and a strange sensation ran through her, as if she were violating something that should have remained closed. When she lifted the lid, a chill of even colder air escaped, as if decades of silence had been released all at once. Inside were delicate fabrics, old dresses, yellowed veils, lace gloves, carefully folded. Among them, one object caught her attention, a small, brown, leather-bound book, worn and cracked, held shut by a faded fabric ribbon. Helena picked it up carefully, feeling its light weight, yet also sensing it carried something she couldn't explain. She untied the ribbon, and the diary opened with a silent sigh, revealing yellowed pages and a firm, slightly right-slanted handwriting. In the top corner of the first page it read, Katerina Montero, January 1912. Helena smiled at the sight of her great-grandmother's name, but the feeling wasn't just affection or nostalgia. There was also a flicker of unease. The first pages were simple records: the corn harvest, the sewing of a dress, a visit from her friend Joanna. But as she turned the pages, the tone shifted subtly. The sentences grew shorter, and some words were struck through with force. Then she reached a passage that made her stop. Tonight, a man knocked at the door. The storm seemed determined to swallow the house, and his eyes held something I can't tell was fear or guilt. He asked for shelter. I hesitated, but I couldn't refuse. Helena felt her heartbeat quicken. The story had taken a turn she had never heard in family conversations. She kept reading. In the following days, her great-grandmother described the man's silent visits to the yard, conversations at dusk, glances exchanged when no one else was around. Until, weeks later, the diary recorded something even more mysterious. Today, he left. He didn't even leave his name, but he left something that will forever change this house. I cannot tell anyone. No one. Helena read and reread that page, goosebumps prickling her skin. What could be so serious it demanded eternal silence? Her hand trembled as she turned to the next page, but there, the writing abruptly shifted back to mundane notes about purchases and farm work, as if nothing had happened. It was impossible not to feel that a secret lingered between the lines. And Helena, without even realizing it, had just opened a door to a past that refused to remain buried. Downstairs, a loud clap of thunder rattled the house, and for an instant, Helena had the unsettling sensation that she was not alone in the attic. Helena came down from the attic with the diary pressed tightly to her chest, feeling the invisible weight of the object. When she reached the living room, she found her mother dozing in the armchair, a blanket over her legs and her pale face softly lit by the lamp. Clara looked more fragile than Helena remembered, and for a moment she thought about waking her to show her the diary. But something held her back. Maybe it was the memory of the way her mother spoke of Katerina, always with a tone of reverence, as if speaking her great-grandmother's name might summon a spirit that still watched over the family. In the official version, Katerina Montero was the pillar of the household. Born in 1890, the daughter of farmers, she married young to a cattle trader named Antonio. Widowed at 32, she raised 4 children on her own, managed the land, and ensured that none of them went hungry even in the hardest years. She was remembered as a woman of unshakable faith who held morality and tradition above all else. Helena had grown up hearing about how Katerina helped neighbors during droughts, cooked for needy families, and sewed clothes for orphans. Those stories had been repeated so often they became almost family legends. But the diary revealed a different side, a Katerina who felt fear, who hesitated, who kept secrets. Helena decided to start from the beginning, reading the first pages carefully. She discovered details that had never been mentioned before: small quarrels with relatives, disputes over inheritance, disagreements with the local church, and above all, repeated references to a dangerous friendship with a woman named Beatrice, whom the family had always vaguely described as a distant cousin. Back then, the town they lived in was small, surrounded by farmland and pasture. Everyone knew each other, and any news spread in a matter of hours. Katerina lived in the big house that now belonged to Clara, Helena's mother. The property, built by Katerina's husband before his death, had thick walls, tall windows, and a cellar that, according to rumor, stored not just provisions but also secrets. The diary often mentioned the backyard, where there was an old well and a century-old fig tree. It was there, Katerina wrote, that she would sit under the lamplight and write while the children slept. The image, a lone woman writing in the dark while the rest of the house lay in silence, began to repeat itself in Helena's mind, almost like a living painting. But what stood out most was the sudden shift in tone on the night of the storm. Katerina's writing changed from descriptive, almost poetic prose to short, urgent sentences, as if she had little time to write or feared being interrupted. The man asked for shelter, said he had come from far away. He didn't ask about me, but he observed everything. Eyes of someone who doesn't trust, or who's hiding something. Helena closed the diary for a moment, taking a deep breath. Who was this man? Why did Katerina describe him so carefully, yet avoid mentioning his name? Determined to learn more about the time, Helena went to the cabinet in the living room and pulled out a box of old photo albums. Among sepia photographs and family portraits, she found an image of a young Katerina, wearing a simple dress and her hair tied back. Beside her stood a woman Helena assumed was Beatrice. Both were smiling, but there was something in their eyes that seemed to share a secret. In the days that followed, Helena began paying closer attention to her mother. Clara avoided going up to the attic and never spoke of the past beyond the official stories. When Helena casually mentioned looking through old photographs, her mother only responded with a curt, and changed the subject. One afternoon, while Clara was sleeping, Helena decided to explore the house's library, where books from several generations were kept. Among novels, Bibles, and encyclopedias, she found a hardcover volume titled Parish Records, 1900 to 1950. Flipping through it, she saw that the first pages listed names and dates of baptisms, marriages, and deaths. She searched for Montero and found Caterina's record, her marriage, and the birth of her 4 children. But one detail stood out. Between the second and third child, there was a 5-year gap, with no record of any kind. The memory of the diary entry, about something that will forever change this house, returned sharply. What if that blank space concealed the birth of the baby she had written about? And worse, what if that child had never been officially registered, just as Caterina had hinted? That night, Helena tried once again to speak to her mother. "Mom, do you remember if great-grandma Caterina had any other children?" Clara, sipping her tea, paused for a second, looked at her daughter, and answered, "Of course not, and even if she had, it doesn't matter anymore." "But what if it matters to me?" The look Clara gave her was quick and cold, like the flash of a knife. "There are things, Helena, that we don't go looking for protection." A shiver ran down Helena's spine. It wasn't just denial, it was a warning. The following days were marked by a growing restlessness. Helena couldn't focus on her daily tasks, and even caring for her mother had become mechanical. Her great-grandmother's diary stayed tucked away in the nightstand beside her bed, but it seemed to pulse like a living heart every time she walked past it. Every night, Helena locked herself in to read a few more pages. The more she read, the more the image of Caterina as the saint of the family unraveled. There, in her own handwriting, was a woman full of contradictions. Strong yet vulnerable, devout yet willing to break vows, generous yet capable of hiding something grave until her dying day. It was during one of those readings that Helena found an entry that would completely change her perception. "The baby was born healthy. I cried, but not from joy. I know he cannot have my name. It's far too dangerous. I've trusted Beatrice. She will do what's necessary to ensure no one knows. Perhaps one day, when it's safe, I can tell. But I doubt that day will come." Helena read the words over and over, a knot forming in her stomach. The baby had existed, and if Caterina had entrusted Beatrice to hide him, it meant he was raised elsewhere, but probably not far away. At that time, the town was small, and hiding someone often meant nothing more than moving to a different street or neighborhood and changing the last name. From that moment, Helena began searching through not only family documents but also public records. She visited the municipal registry office, where she spent hours flipping through old ledgers. She found dozens of children born around the same time, but only one coincidence stood out. A boy named Miguel Becerra, recorded as the child of unknown parents and raised by a guardian named Beatriz Montero. Helena's blood ran cold. Beatriz wasn't just a distant cousin, she was the keeper of the secret, and Miguel was, in all likelihood, Caterina's son with the mysterious man. But who was Miguel to Helena? If her calculations were right, he would be her real grandfather, which meant the official story of her lineage was a fabrication, built to protect a reputation. As she tried to process this, Helena noticed something odd. A man was watching her from across the street as she left the registry office. He wore a plain hat, dark clothing, and didn't seem to be in any hurry. She tried to ignore him, but when she turned the corner, the same man appeared again a few yards away. Helena quickened her pace and ducked into the first cafe she saw, watching through the window until she was certain he was gone. That night, she decided to tell her mother about Miguel. Clara stayed silent for a long moment before speaking in a near-pleading tone. "Helena, please, stop this." "You knew, didn't you?" Helena pressed. Clara looked away and murmured, "Knowing doesn't mean you can speak of it. There are people who haven't forgotten. The words echoed in Helena's mind like a sentence. People who hadn't forgotten. That meant the secret still mattered to someone alive, and that they might be willing to protect that truth at any cost. The next day, Helena searched for clues about the man who had appeared at Katerina's door that stormy night. She combed through old editions of the town's newspaper at the public library and found a series of articles about a certain Alvaro Sales, an itinerant merchant accused of smuggling and even violent crimes. The detail that almost made Helena drop the paper was the date, just a few months before Miguel's birth. The photographs showed a man with harsh features, piercing eyes, and a strange, familiar air Helena couldn't ignore. Then she saw something even more disturbing. Near the end of one of the articles, it stated that Alvaro had mysteriously disappeared during a storm, last seen near the area where Katerina lived. Helena felt her breath grow heavier. She was getting too close to the truth. And worse, the feeling of being followed had returned. That night, when she looked out her bedroom window, she again saw a shadowy figure standing across the street. The diary was no longer just a historical record. It was a key. And like any key, it could open doors that were better left locked. Helena stayed awake all night. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The creak of the wood, the wind against the windows, the ticking of the clock on the wall. The diary lay open on the bed, and she was scribbling notes in a separate notebook, trying to piece together the timeline of events Katerina had described. Dates, names, places, everything had to fit. In the first column, she listed the known events: the storm, the man's arrival, the baby's birth, the handover to Beatrice, and the sudden disappearance of any mention of it. In the second column, she wrote down her own discoveries: Miguel's record, the link to Beatrice, and the articles about Alvaro Sales. In the third, she left space for unanswered questions. Who else knew? Why keep it hidden for so long? And, most of all, what had happened to Alvaro? Helena knew she needed to be careful. The image of the man who had been following her for the past few days lingered in her mind. To avoid raising suspicion, she decided to mix her investigation with ordinary tasks: grocery shopping, trips to the pharmacy, visits to the church. But inside, her mind never rested. The first step was to look for Miguel's descendants. A quick search of public records revealed that he had 2 children, both alive and living in nearby towns. Helena wrote down their addresses but hesitated. How could she approach them without arousing suspicion? Posing as someone doing historical research seemed like the safest option. At the same time, she decided to dig deeper into Beatrice's life. She learned that Beatrice had never officially married, but had spent most of her life on a small, isolated farm where, according to neighbors, she received occasional visits from well-dressed men and people from the big city. One of the few existing photographs showed an elderly Beatrice sitting on the porch, her gaze so enigmatic it seemed to hide 100 stories. As her research deepened, Helena began to notice subtle signs that someone had been tampering with things inside the house. A drawer left open, the diary slightly out of place, a glass she was sure she hadn't used. There were no signs of forced entry, but the feeling of intrusion was real. Determined to protect herself, she installed a small hidden camera on the bookshelf in her bedroom. She didn't want to alarm her mother, so she kept the plan to herself. The second step was to return to the registry office for more details about Miguel. The clerk, a kindly older woman, lowered her voice and said, "You're from the Montero family, aren't you?" Helena nodded, surprised. Then, "Don't get too involved in this. It's an old story, but it still casts a shadow." Her words echoed like a bad omen. Despite the warning, Helena scheduled a visit with one of Miguel's sons. Using the pretense of writing a book on local history, she managed to set a meeting for the following week. But 3 days before the date, an anonymous envelope appeared on her doorstep. Inside was a single photograph. Her leaving the registry office with a red circle drawn around her face and a note that read, "Curious people disappear." The fear was real now. But her curiosity and her sense of injustice were stronger. Helena decided she wouldn't back down. She began studying routes, schedules, and the most discreet way to meet Miguel's son without being followed. The third step was to search the attic for anything else connected to the diary. She rummaged for hours until, at the bottom of an old suitcase, she found an envelope sealed with wax, marked with the initials CM. Inside was a single letter, never sent, written by Katerina. If this paper is found, it means I was unable to tell you in person. The man from that night, he was not a stranger. He was already part of our lives, but no one knew. The danger didn't arrive with the storm. It had been here for a long time. The revelation brought more questions than answers. Who exactly was this man? And how could he already be part of their lives without anyone knowing? With each piece she uncovered, Helena felt the ground beneath her growing less stable. But there was no turning back now. The fourth step, and perhaps the riskiest, would be to confront her mother once and for all. Night fell early that day. Heavy clouds hid any trace of the moon, and the street was plunged into a darkness that seemed to have weight of its own. Inside the Montero house, Helena walked down the hallway as if approaching a minefield. The diary was tucked under her arm, Katerina's letter hidden in her pocket. She found Clara in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the television, which was turned off. Her mother's face was pale, the circles under her eyes deeper than ever. For a moment, Helena almost backed away, but she knew there wouldn't be another chance. "Mom, we need to talk," she said firmly. Clara didn't answer right away. She simply looked up at her daughter as if she already knew exactly what the conversation would be about. "It's about what you found in the attic, isn't it?" she asked, her voice low but carrying an old, heavy weight. Helena sat in the armchair opposite her and set the diary on the table, opening it to the page about the storm. "You knew Katerina had another child, Miguel, and that he was my real grandfather." Clara let out a sigh, as if each of her daughter's words was another nail driven into something she'd tried to keep intact. "Helena, you don't understand. This isn't just about our family. It's dangerous." "Dangerous for who?" Helena pressed. "For us? For the reputation of people who aren't even alive anymore? Or for those who still want the truth buried?" Clara clutched the blanket tighter around her as if trying to shield herself from something unseen. "You think you're ready to hear it, but you're not." Helena pulled the letter from her pocket and placed it on the table. "Katerina said the man from that night was already part of her life. Who was he, Mom?" Silence stretched between them. Clara stared at the letter but didn't touch it. Finally, she spoke. "He was your great-grandfather's brother, a man who disappeared from all records long before you were born because he was dangerous. No one knew he was still alive until that night. And Katerina fell in love with him," Helena finished, her stomach turning. Clara closed her eyes. "It wasn't just love, Helena. He manipulated, controlled, had enemies. And when he disappeared again, he left behind more than a child. He left a trail of people willing to make sure certain truths never came to light." Before Helena could respond, a loud noise came from the kitchen, like something heavy hitting the floor. The two women looked at each other. Helena stood and walked slowly to the doorway, but before opening it, she heard quick footsteps retreating toward the back of the house. She ran to the yard and found the gate wide open, the chain lying on the ground. As she made her way back to the living room, she noticed the diary was gone from the table. The letter was still there, but the book had vanished. "Mom!" Helena shouted. "Did you take the diary?" Clara shook her head, terrified. "Helena, they know you've been digging into this." "They who?" Helena almost shouted. "People who still carry his blood, and who believe anyone trying to expose the past deserves to be silenced." The landline rang, a sharp, piercing sound that seemed to freeze the air in the room. Clara hesitated, but Helena picked it up. "Stop digging, or you'll be buried along with what you find." a cold male voice said before hanging up. Helena stood frozen, staring at nothing, the sound of the threat echoing in her mind. The danger was no longer abstract. It was here, waiting. The phone threat stayed in Helena's mind for the rest of the night. The house, which had always felt like a refuge, now had shadows with shapes. The wind made the fig tree in the yard groan, and the sound felt like a deep voice whispering a warning down the hall. Clara, curled up in the armchair, shivered from cold and fear. She kept insisting that Helena lock all doors and windows, but nothing could shut what was open inside. The certainty that the past had returned, demanding payment. Helena took a deep breath and went back to her room. She turned on her laptop, accessed the hidden folder with the camera she had set up days before, and fast-forwarded through the footage from earlier that evening. At 7:17 p.m., the frame of the hallway vibrated almost imperceptibly. At 7:18, a gloved hand entered the frame, pushing the back door open with its body. Quiet, quick. At 7:19, a figure crossed the living room and stopped in front of the table. The face was hidden under a cap and the brim of a coat. The intruder glanced around, ran a hand across the tabletop, feeling the wood as if searching for a hidden compartment, and, without hurry, took the diary. As they turned, the camera caught a detail. Small but devastating. A faded blue fabric bracelet braided with sewing thread. It was identical to the one Clara had worn ever since she became ill. Helena's stomach dropped. She rewound the video frame by frame, zooming in, looking for anything to contradict what she saw. A reflection, a smudge, a trick of the light. But the bracelet was there. And the height, the gait, the subtle tremor of the right hand. Everything screamed her mother's name. Helena walked to the living room as if crossing an icy river. Clara was still in the armchair, blanket on her lap, hands clasped. When her daughter appeared, Clara's gaze wavered and looked away. "It was you," Helena said, her own voice scaring her. "You took the diary." Clara closed her eyes. Silence thickened until it felt solid. Only the clock kept shamelessly counting the wrong seconds of a life long derailed. "I tried," Clara finally replied, her voice coarse. "I tried to hold it in my hands, like water. But the past slips, Helena. It always slips." "Where is it?" The question came out steady. "Who called? Who threatened us?" Clara raised her eyes. Anger, fear, and a twisted love swirled in the same pupil. "If I tell you, you'll die. If I stay silent, maybe you'll live. I'm making the choice a mother makes." "And what if I don't give you that choice?" Helena shot back, tired of a protection that only hurt. "You owe me the truth." Her mother inhaled shakily. The color drained from her face. "The truth, then." She ran a hand over her forehead as if wiping away sweat that wasn't there. "The man from the storm. He wasn't a stranger. He was Alvaro, your great-grandfather's brother. He was expelled from the family after a scandal, vanished from all records, lived on the edges where names mean nothing and hands mean everything. He came back that night, wounded, hunted, asking for shelter. Katerina took him in, at first out of fear, then for something she wouldn't admit even to God. He stayed for weeks, and when they tried to take him, he fought back. A man died in the yard." Clara's voice faltered. "The yard of this house." Helena felt her heart rip from its roots. The oil lamp she had imagined so many times in Katerina's hands now looked like a beacon over a crime scene. "Katerina covered it up," Clara went on quietly. "Beatrice helped. The body was buried far away. The blood washed with well water and lime. The whole town heard shots that night, but the storm roared louder. Alvaro disappeared again, and Katerina found out she was pregnant. Miguel was born months later. No father listed. No father, officially." Helena thought of the parish records, the gap between children, the blank space that now had the texture of mud. But one question remained stuck. And why? Why now? Why the threats? Why the diary? Clara clasped her hands as if she were cold inside, because the story didn't end. Alvaro's family carried on. Not here, not with our last name, but with his blood spread through respected names. Some grew up hating this house, accusing Caterina of having stolen Alvaro's rightful future, the legitimate line, the fortune that could have been. Others began demanding silence. There was money, Helena. The word came out bitter. There was money to keep quiet, to fix certificates, to make cases disappear. That money moved, turned into land, accounts, favors, ended up in the wrong hands, as it always does, and whoever has money can buy anything, including history. A sharp nausea rose in Helena. The house, the land, the life built around a name, all of it resting on a body under the rain. Who has the diary? She pressed, almost voiceless. Clara studied her as if gauging the depth of a wound before tearing it open. He came for it. The pronoun hit the carpet with human weight. Alvaro's grandson. She swallowed, relative, like poison. He takes care of what's left of his grandfather's legacy, debts, loyalties, the men who cornered you at the notary's office. He's the one who called. He told me that if you stopped, they'd forget. I believed it for a few days. Then I realized no one forgets. They just wait to get stronger. Helena remembered the man in the hat, the red circle in the anonymous photo. Suddenly, the whole world was a map of arrows pointing to one destination, the fig tree in the yard. That note in the mailbox, she murmured. The next generation must know its place. The next generation, Clara repeated dryly, her eyes burning. You. A floorboard creaked in the hall, slicing through the room like a knife. Helena's head turned instinctively. A light-controlled sound, the weight of someone who knew the floor well. The doorbell rang right after. Twice. 3 short chimes, just like in the diary on the night of the storm. The past knocking politely, yet threateningly. "Don't open it," Clara whispered. Helena went anyway, not out of bravery, but out of exhaustion. Everything that had been locked away now thirsted for light. She looked through the peephole. The man in the hat stood on the porch, soaked, the brim dripping like a ticking clock. Beside him was a man in a suit, far too dry for someone who'd come through the rain. Clear proof they had a car, a driver, logistics. Behind them, almost invisible under the eaves, 2 glowing cigarette tips lingered in silence. Helena cracked the door. "The diary isn't yours," the man in the hat said without introducing himself. "But you read it. And when someone reads something they shouldn't, the problem for everyone stops being the paper." "The problem has always been the blood," Helena replied before thinking. He gave a tired half-smile. "Then we agree." Clara appeared in the hallway, her fingers white on the doorknob. "Leave my daughter alone." "You did your part," the man said without even looking at her. "No one forgets that." Helena understood it all at once. Clara had handed over the diary in a bargain, and bargains with people like this were bottomless pits. Anger and compassion strangled each other inside her, leaving only the blinding clarity of someone with no corners left to run to. "What do you want?" she asked. "We want the story to end here," said the man in the suit. His voice was flat, trained, contractual. No books, no public displays, no visits to notary offices, no interviews with Miguel's descendants. Undo your notes. Stop digging for Beatrice in the records. Don't stir up old names. He glanced into the living room, weighing objects with his eyes. "And hand over what you still have." "I don't have anything else." He tilted his head almost indulgently. "Everyone always has one more thing." He extended an envelope. "Addresses, dates. Read it, and choose your family's health." Helena took the envelope without lowering her eyes. The man in the hat stepped back. A study concluded. Before turning to leave, he said, not as a threat, but as a diagnosis, Katerina did what she could. Now, you do what's left. They left. The cigarettes at the back of the yard went dark like dead fireflies. The door closed, and with it, the world's temperature dropped. Helena sat on the living room floor and opened the envelope. Inside were copies, photographed and numbered pages of the diary, records and clippings she hadn't seen before. Someone had gotten ahead of her, dismantling the puzzle to reassemble it their own way. There was also a list of points of interest: the notary's office, the parish archive, the municipal library, the home of one of Miguel's sons, every place where they already had Helena's photo, enlarged and marked in red pen. At the end, one address was underlined 3 times: a rural road, kilometer 7. Beside it, 2 words: last version. Clara stood in the doorway, a faithful ghost. "You're not going," she said, more a prayer than a command. "I am," Helena said without hostility, "because if I don't, they'll come back. If I do, maybe they'll come back anyway. There's no right choice, but there is the choice that carries my name." Clara clutched the blanket, closed her eyes, and for a second, the mask cracked. "Don't carry alone what has already broken us." Helena thought of answering, but swallowed it. She grabbed her coat, tucked the envelope inside, and slipped Katerina's letter into her pocket. Before leaving, she ran her hand along the hallway wall, searching for an old sensation: the cold plaster, the fine crack, the nail without a picture. Everything was the same. Only she had changed. A light rain was falling when the car left the narrow neighborhood street. The city slept, the dashboard clock flashing a time that respected no one. The rural road, dark and uneven, swallowed the headlights like a throat. At kilometer 7, a barbed wire gate, no sign, no guard. The address in the envelope was just that: nothing, and nothing is always the best wrapping for a secret. Helena parked on the muddy shoulder and got out. The rain pattered on leaves, and the childhood fig tree seemed to have offspring on this side too. A thick trunk, cut marks, a bench improvised from planks. There were footprints, wide boots, deep soles, recent comings and goings, and there was a smell: turned earth, freshly exposed dampness. She walked slowly, her shoes sinking softly, and stepped on a line of dry lime whitening the ground like a scar. The light from her phone swept over a patch of disturbed soil. Beside it, a shovel leaning, still dripping. "Don't touch it," a voice said behind her. Helena turned quickly, the phone's light trembling. The man in the hat was there, alone. No suit, no cigarettes, no hurry. "I came to see if you'd obey," he said calmly. "Almost no one obeys. You seemed like someone who would. Sorry for the mistake." "What's there?" Helena asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He shrugged as if talking about the weather. "Old stuff that smells strong in the rain, what you'd call evidence, what we call rest." Helena took a step forward. He didn't stop her. The light caught a piece of fabric in the mud, dark leather, old stitching. She knelt, her hands cold, and pulled. A bundle came out of the ground, heavy, wrapped in tarp and tied with rope. Her nails protested, her soul resisted, her body pushed on. The knot gave way with a fiber's gasp. The tarp opened like an eyelid. Inside, wood, remnants of a crudely nailed crate with bone fragments still clinging to clay and lime. Helena's stomach turned, but her eyes didn't look away. There, at the edge of earth and memory, was what the story had been missing. Proof that the family's yard didn't end at the walls. It ran underground along the road, to other edges, to other lives. "Alvaro?" she asked softly, already knowing. "No," he said, the word falling like an anvil. "The other one. The one who died that night. The one Alvaro killed." He nodded toward it. "Your great-grandfather?" The word ripped through Helena's lungs. The ground pulled harder. Katerina hadn't covered for a stranger's crime. She had hidden fratricide. The perfect matriarch had built the house on a brother killed by another, and the family's morality, its prayers, its framed photographs, its Sunday tables, all planted on the grave of a lie with bones. Helena wanted to vomit. She wanted to scream. Instead, she stayed on her knees in the rain, staring at what was left of a man to whom her family owed at least a name, if not an entire life. The man in the hat watched unhurriedly, like someone following the body's clock finding a new rhythm. "See," he said almost gently, "now you know why you can't tell. What will you say? That the woman who raised you is the daughter of a murder-turned-legacy? That your last name was bought with lime and a shovel? That the land was watered with two things, rain and blood?" Helena closed her eyes for a second and saw it all more clearly. The fig tree in the yard bending to the wind like praying for what it buried, the gap in the records, the bought favors, the men in suits rewriting history with stamps and cynicism. Clara, as a girl, inheriting the duty to stay, silent. She saw Miguel, raised with a name that wasn't his, and all the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren trying to walk straight on a tilted ground. "Hasn't it rotted?" she murmured, not realizing the words had come out. "It has," he said simply. "And it rots people too." Helena's phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. "Come back, your mother fell." Followed by an address. Her own home. Life, as always, collecting what the dead decided. Helena staggered to her feet. The man in the hat didn't stop her. As she backed away, he crouched down, pulled the tarp back over what he had revealed, tying the knot with the same calm whether it was around sacks of flour or sacks of guilt. When she reached her car, he called out loud enough for the rain not to steal it. "No one wants the end of the truth, miss. They just wanted to have no witnesses." The road carried her back to the city in a blur. Streetlights, headlights, puddles exploding under the tires. It was all a birth corridor for the wrong kind of arrival. Helena entered the house as if the planet was out of air. She found Clara collapsed beside the armchair, her head resting on the arm, eyes open to a ceiling that gave nothing back. She was still breathing. Helena called the ambulance, did what she knew, counted the minutes by the noise from the street. All the while, the envelope with the copies, forgotten on the table, seemed to sweat. At the hospital, long corridors, cold light, the smell of disinfectant choking memory, Clara was taken for tests. Helena sat in a plastic chair, Katerina's letter pressing against the inside of her coat pocket as if it wanted out. She opened it and reread the ending, which had always seemed like just a wrinkle in the paper. "If I must die without absolution, so be it. God knows I didn't protect evil. I protected what was left." For the first time, Helena understood the whole sentence. Katerina hadn't asked for forgiveness. She had asked for condemnation. She had offered herself the punishment the living never gave. But punishment, like everything unfairly distributed, had fallen on other shoulders. Beatrice's, Miguel's, Clara's, and now Helena's. A doctor appeared with eyes trained to deliver news without opening wounds. "Gastrointestinal bleeding. We're containing it. She'll need to be kept under observation." She measured Helena for a second, then added in a more human tone, "Go home, get some rest. She'll need you clear-headed." Helena nodded, her legs weak. In the parking lot, the sky was lightening slightly, but the brightness felt like plaster. She drove back slowly, radio off, hands cold, mind hot. When she entered the living room, she saw the envelope where she'd left it. Beside it, another sheet, one that hadn't been there before. Someone had been inside. It was a copy of a diary page about the burial in the rain, but with a line she didn't remember reading. A hasty postscript, overlapping letters, ink slightly smudged. Miguel already understands. He won't tell. Clara is still little. If one day a daughter of hers insists, let her read this. The house belongs to the dead. We only live here. Helena leaned on the table. The sentence weighed on the edge of reality. The house belongs to the dead. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a moral deed. The family had raised generations under the roof of someone who had been taken from life and buried as an inconvenience. That house, those rooms, the photos on the walls, all were collateral. A stone tapped against the window. Helena ran, lifted the blind. The street was empty, wet, cleaner than it should be. On the sill, a folded note held by a pebble. The same paper as the anonymous envelope, the same disciplined handwriting. Last warning, the story ends here, or the house returns. Choose by tomorrow. Or the house returns. What did return mean? Land, money, name, or something no notary could register? Peace, silence, dignity. The family that remained could fit in 2 chairs, Helena and Clara. And an entire house couldn't protect anyone when it was, itself, the trophy of a crime. Helena opened the hallway.